I'm not a lawyer, but the government and the defense have each submitted verdict sheets that they want the jury to use when deciding the verdict in Diddy's federal trial. So if you want a glimpse at what the jury could potentially be using when deciding Diddy's fate, keep watching. First, to make sure we are all on the same page, a verdict sheet refers to the actual form jurors will mark and turn in once they've decided the verdict. And for Diddy's case, he is facing a total of 5 charges, and the jury has to decide a verdict on each one. So starting with the government's proposed form, count 1 is listed first, which is the RICO charge, and there's an option to mark either guilty or not guilty. If the jury were to find Diddy not guilty of RICO, they would mark that and then skip down to count 2. However, if the jury finds Diddy guilty of RICO, meaning they believe prosecutors have proven Diddy has an enterprise and that he or members of that enterprise committed a pattern is defined as at least 2 instances of racketeering activity within a 10-year span, they would mark guilty and then go to the next section, which actually lists each instance of racketeering activity the government claims he and his enterprise committed. So for context, throughout this trial, the government has been trying to prove that Diddy and his enterprise engaged in kidnapping, which includes the allegation that Capricorn Clark was forced to go with Diddy the morning Kid Cudi's car was blown up, arson, which of course has to do with Kid Cudi's car actually being blown up, bribery, which has to do with the money that was paid in exchange for the Intercontinental Hotel video. Then there's tampering with a witness, forced labor, trafficking, which is specific to Cassie and Jane, transportation for the purpose of prostitution, and then there's distributing and possessing narcotics with intent to distribute. So if the jury believes beyond a reasonable doubt prosecutors have proven Diddy and or members of his enterprise committed any of these activities and that they were done in connection with the overall enterprise and not as isolated or individual events, the jurors would mark proven for the ones they believe were proven and then not proven for the ones they don't believe were proven. And then they would move on to count 2. And again, to reiterate, the jury needs to believe at least 2 of those racketeering acts were proven by prosecutors in order to find Diddy guilty of the RICO. Now moving on to count 2, which is the charge for trafficking Cassie, jurors need to decide if prosecutors proved Diddy used force, fraud, or coercion to get Cassie to engage in acts with men that were done in exchange for money and then mark guilty or not guilty. Count 3 is transportation with intent to engage in prostitution, which breaks down to if prosecutors proved Diddy transported or provided the transportation for Cassie to cross state lines and engage in pay for play. And then count 4 is the trafficking charge for Jane, and count 5 is the transportation to engage in prostitution for Jane. And then at the bottom of the form, it simply says, once you have considered all of these questions, please have the foreperson sign and date the verdict sheet and notify the marshal that you have reached a verdict. Now that's the proposed form from the government. Now let's look at the proposed form from the defense. And their form is actually really similar to the government's. However, instead of listing each of the racketeering activities for count 1, the defense's form has a line where they want jurors to write in the activities they believe the prosecutors have proven. And then the other difference is for count 3 and 5, which on the prosecutor's form, these charges said transportation to engage in prostitution. But on the defense's form, it says Mann Act transportation and then says either Cassie or Jane's name. And for context, the Mann Act is the actual law prosecutors say that Diddy broke, so it's what he's actually charged under. But on the government's form, it's more like layman's terms. So those are the proposed forms, and we will see what the judge ultimately decides on. But for now, y'all tell me which form you like better. And also, even though we're not done, tell me what your verdict would be.